you'll have to forgive Jeanette. I always have a note card up here that has like my sermon notes on it, and today I had like 5 of them all together because I missed last week, and I'm going to be gone next week, and so I felt like I needed to get, and it was more to just poke fun at her that I had all these cards put together, and so that's why she played our ending benediction for it, because she was wanting me to hurry up. And so what I'll do right here is I'll just get rid of these 4 right here, and we'll just go with 1 card. That's what we'll do. Does that make you feel better already? Hey, let's go to 1 Corinthians 10. I love you, Jeanette. 1 Corinthians 10. Okay, this is Paul speaking. Now, what we have to remember is that in the scriptures, the verses and the chapters were put in later. Okay, Paul didn't write and wrote 1, 2, 3, 4, chapter 2. He didn't write that. He wrote a letter. All right, so it's okay to read over a chapter heading, meaning that you could read the end of verse 10 or the end of chapter 10 into chapter 11, and it's still part of the same thoughts. I mean, Paul was writing a letter. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to start in chapter 10, verse 31, and then pull in a little bit of chapter 11 with it. So Paul says, whether then you eat, drink, whatever you do all to the glory of God. Give no offense either to Jews, Greeks, or to the church of God, just as I also please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of the many, so that they may be saved. Be imitators of me, just as I also am of Christ. Essentially, what Paul is saying to us is imitate me as I imitate Christ. Okay, I am writing a letter to the church, and I'm imploring the church this: imitate me as I imitate Christ. This is what Paul is saying. Lord heaven, we love you. Lord, I struggle over those words because it is so hard for us to stand here on this earth and say to somebody else, follow me as I follow Jesus. Lord, Satan does a really good job of letting us see the sin in our own lives. Lord, I love it. I love it. I love how Paul said, be an imitator of me as I imitate Christ. Lord, I love what he is communicating. Christ is the one to imitate. Lord, I pray that you strengthen us in our inner man, in that place where your Spirit dwells, that we would be bold enough to not only imitate Christ, but invite somebody to do life with us as we do. Lord, I pray that you bond us, unite us, strengthen us as we pray the prayer that the church has prayed for 2,000 years. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. Who are we supposed to be imitators of? Of Christ. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is what did Jesus do that we can imitate? Now, he went to the cross and died for my sins, rose again on the 3rd day. Can I do that? Oh, that's the role he played in all this whole thing that we call church. It's not my role. But we can imitate Jesus, and so we have to get an understanding of what is it about Jesus that we can imitate. Hebrews 5 helps us with that. Hebrews 5, starting in verse 7. In the days of his flesh, who are we talking about? In the days of his flesh, he offered up both prayers, supplications with loud crying and tears to the one able to save him from death, and he was heard because of his piety. Now let's just pause right there for a minute. This is Jesus, Son of God, born of Mary. He was offering up tears, loud crying, supplication, prayers to who? To God the Father. And how is God the Father described in verse 5? as the one able to save Jesus from death. Verse 6. Although he was a son, he learned obedience from the things which he suffered. How did Jesus learn obedience? From the things he suffered. Verse 9. And having been made perfect, he became to all those who obey him the source of eternal salvation. What's the source of eternal salvation? Jesus. Verse 10, being designated by God as a high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. I would love to run down the rabbit trail. Who is Melchizedek? David, not today, but we'll go there at some point. We'll go there at some point. So let's wrap this up, put it together. In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers, supplications with loud crying and tears to God the Father, who was able to save him from death. And he was heard because of his piety. What does piety mean? Reverence is the perfect description of what piety means. God the Father heard God the Son's prayers because God the Son prayed in a reverent way. And he prayed, save me from death. Jesus needed to be saved from death. It goes against everything that we know. It's less about the theology of it, and it's more about the way that Jesus approached the throne. He approached the throne with much reverence, with much surrender, with much piety. And his prayers were heard because of the way he approached it. Is that something we can learn from? So when Paul says, be imitators of me as I imitate Christ, what is Paul imitating? The way in which you approach the throne with much reverence, with much piety, with much, don't assume you know it all. Assume that God is God and we are not. And we may not have all right. Our theologies are not going to be bulletproof. Although he was a son, he learned obedience from the things which he suffered. Are we sons and daughters as well? Yes, we are. Okay, the church is sons and daughters as well. How are we going to learn obedience? Thank you, Mary Jo. Suffering. That's how we learn obedience, by suffering. Do bad things happen to good people? You betcha. Why? Because we learn obedience from those things. Those things are necessary. They temper us. They get us ready. This is how Jesus learned it as well. Having been made perfect, he became to all those who obey him the source of eternal salvation. This is where the role of Jesus in the church is beyond what we could ever be. The role or the source of eternal salvation doesn't rest in me or in you or in you. It's only in Jesus because he was made perfect. This is the role that God the Father had for God the Son. This is how Jesus can be both human and God at the same time. There are things that we can identify with Jesus because he's just as human as us. And there's things that Jesus is that we will never be because he's God and we're not. Let's go to Matthew 6. This is the warm-up. All right, so Matthew 6. This is our sixth sermon of Matthew 6. It's hard to say without spitting on people. The sixth sermon of Matthew 6. And so we're going to recap just a bit. Matthew 6, Jesus talks about three things that he assumes that his followers will do. He says, when you pray, when you give, when you fast, do these in ways that don't draw attention to yourself. In fact, the wording that he likes to use, verse 4 would be fine. It says, so that your giving will be in secret, and your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. In other words, when I give, when I pray, when I fast, I should do that in such a way that it's just about God and I. It's about our relationship. Now, does that mean praying in public is evil? No, that's not what it means. Does it mean every time you give money to a cause nobody should know about? No, that's not what it means. It's about the desire of your heart. If the desire of your heart is, whoo, look at me and the way I pray, then that's messed up. Does that make sense? When you give, when you pray, when you fast. Are these commands? No, they're assumptions. I think the example I used here weeks ago is if you were applying at a construction company for a job, I would assume that you would measure, cut, and hammer. Right? You guys remember that? Now, it isn't a command, but if you're going to be a carpenter, I'm assuming you're going to measure, cut, and hammer. Why? Because it makes you a better carpenter. Why does pray, give, and fast? Why are they assumptions? What is the point of them? Makes you a better Christian. It draws you closer to God. It draws you closer to Jesus. It's about the pursuit of righteousness. Does that make sense? So the overall of Matthew chapter 6, which includes the Lord's Prayer, which includes lots of good stuff, is, hey, this is how you pursue righteousness. Now, go to Matthew 6:33. 6:33. Shirley, read that for me really loud. Seek first the kingdom of God, and then what? Say it again. And his righteousness, and what? And all of these other things will be added to you, okay? So the role of the church in our praying, giving, and fasting, and let our fascination be Jesus and Jesus only, is to seek him first. Seek the kingdom first. Seek righteousness first. Above what? Above anything else. Above anything else. Now, last week I didn't preach, right? But a couple weeks ago we talked about how the eye was the lamp of the body. You guys remember this? And how Jesus is warning us against a false light. In other words, you can receive a false light. And the light is an ideology. The light is how you view the world. The light is how you determine left, right, up, down, good, evil. This is the light that filters through your body. If the light is actually darkness, it says, how great will the darkness be? Essentially, what Jesus is warning us of, if the thing that you use to determine left, right, up, down, good, evil is flawed, then you're really messed up. Then you're really gone. Because now what you think is good really isn't. And if you think it's good, you war against yourself to try to determine that it isn't. And you just go in this perpetual circle of chaotic, anarchic behavior because you can't tell what good is. Does that make sense? Now, keep that thought and let's go to verse 19. Verse 19. We're going to try to tie all this stuff together. Verse 19. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in or steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. This is last week. So then if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one, love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God in wealth, God in mammon, God in the world, God in money. There's all kind of different ways that your translations will say that. Now understand, these ideas all work together. If we go back to 19, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth. What's a treasure on earth? Wealth, cars, bank accounts, land, material things. He who dies with the most toys, what? Is still dead. Now, the way the world teaches us is he who dies with the most toys wins. All right? This is crazy arithmetic. This is satanic arithmetic. All right? This is putting your stock and your faith in the treasures that thieves will steal, that rust will attack, that decay will get to. What are the treasures in heaven? If I'm putting treasures in heaven, what am I putting in heaven? Say it again, Mary Jo. Eternal life? Yes. No more pain? Happiness? Hopefully myself? Yes. I like that one. won't have any needs, no more sorrow, no more pain, no more tears, no more disease, no more chaos, no more taxes, all kinds of good stuff. You know what's the single greatest thing about the treasures that are in heaven? Jesus is there. And peace. You know, at the end of the day, Jesus is there. Heaven is not this utopian idea in which does not reside the presence of God. It's a utopia with God. That's where our treasure should be. That's where our hope should be. That's where our peace comes from. The God who resides there. Now, we talked about the false light. But what I want to get to is tying these ideas together with verse 24. Nobody has gone to church more than a year or so where the Sunday school cycle wouldn't have come around where you would have learned no one can serve two masters. There's hardly a Christian walking around that doesn't know this. All right? No one can serve two masters, for you'll hate the one, love the other, or you'll be devoted to one. When I was in college, I worked for a construction company based out of Little River, and it was run by 4 brothers. For a while there, I was their only employee. So I had 4 bosses and me, the employee. And so as I walked across the job site, I would get 4 different instructions that most of the time, they weren't the same. And so by the time I got to the other end of the job site, 3 guys were yelling at me and 1 guy was happy. And then as I walked back the other way, it was just the opposite. You know what I mean? And I learned really quick, you can't serve 2 masters, let alone 4. In our daily walk, in this world that seeks to oppress us through the strings of the evil one, if you're not for Jesus, you're for Satan. In this great charade of life that we live in, there's an option A and there's an option B, but there isn't an option C. There isn't a I choose not to play. You don't get that one. That's not on the test. The test is Jesus, not Jesus. Well, not Jesus is a person. Not Jesus is a face. Okay, evil isn't a faceless thing that's anti-good. It's a person. I'm using the word person because I don't know what else to call it. There are 2 masters. Master A, and I'm not using A and B and any other thing but other 1 and 2. Master A will teach us to lust after the treasures of earth. Man, we'll want the new car. We'll want the Jeep. We'll want the vacation house. We're going to want. We're going to lust after the treasures of earth. And we're going to justify it in some way that it's okay. That it's okay. The other master, Master B, is going to teach us to desire the treasures of heaven. The treasures of heaven are love and joy and peace. Think fruits of the Spirit. Master A is a false light ideology. It's a bad light that we're receiving through our eyes. I don't think it's any accident that the part of the body that Jesus uses for this metaphor is the eye. What we see is oftentimes what we become or what we aspire to be. Master B is the true light. Is the true light. They're opposed. If we're listening to the first master, Master A, what he teaches us is that it's about me. It's about what I want. It's about pursuing those things that make my life better. What we learn on the other side is it's not about me, it's about others. It's about what I can do to give to others. It's not about me receiving, it's about me giving. What we learn on this side is that the kingdom can be taken by conquest, a conquest of force. We can force it, we can take it, we can obtain it, it's ours. You see it in our language all the time. Church likes to say things like that, like this. We're going to take communion. That's a conquest by force. Those words drive me crazy. But we say it all the time. Why? Because Satan's really good at what he does. On the other side, it's a conquest by surrender. You receive the kingdom because you're surrendering to it. So we don't take communion, we receive communion. It's a gift of God. We don't take it, we receive it. Does that make sense? Now, that's a really easy one to pick on. But we see it in all these things that we do. We think, I'm earning. Well, you can't earn yourself. I know I'm not, but you behave as if you can. It's not conquest by force, it's conquest by surrender. Two different masters. I could go on and on and on. I'll just do one more example. If I pursue earthly treasures, if I embrace a false ideology, even if it's unknowingly, if I understand, if I feel like it's about me and that I can take it by force, I'm going to learn to hate. I'm going to learn to hate. Because if it's not going my way, if the conquest isn't happening the way that I think it should, if somebody has gotten in my way, I will learn to hate them. If I follow the other master, where I realize it's about heavenly treasures, it's not about me, it's about others. It isn't something that I can take by force, it's something that I receive through surrender, and then I recognize that hate doesn't have any part of that. I will learn to love. In Matthew 6:33, he wraps up the whole chapter. Okay, let's. I got a little bit of time here, so let's take this in order. So as we talk about the masters of verse 24, and I told you that when this was written about Jesus, it wasn't about chapters and verses. Okay, it's a continual thought. So in verse 24, Jesus is speaking. He says, no one can serve two masters, all that stuff that we talked about. For you either hate the one, love the other, or you'll be devoted to one, despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. In other words, you cannot serve God as a master and anything else that's going to prop itself up as a master, and you know where the source of that is. And then he says in verse 25, for this reason. What's the reason? You can't serve two masters. So that's the context that you're carrying forward. For this reason that you can't serve two masters, Jesus says, I say to you, do not be worried about your life as to what you will eat, what you will drink, what your body, what your clothes, blah, 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 all this stuff. Don't worry about it. And then he says in 33, seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Do not worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow will care for itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Each day has enough trouble of its own. There are definitely two masters out there, and they are vying for our attention, but they vie in different ways. Can you use the word vie that way? They vie in different ways? You followed me, didn't you? Okay. At some point, I'm a builder, right? I'm not an English guy. Bo, can you turn off the lights? I want to tell a story. We're going to move into communion, but don't play yet. Okay? There's a painting out there in the hallway, and I look at it every Sunday, and it's a painting of Jesus holding a lamb. Okay, holding one of the, do you say sheeps? Sheep. What's one sheep? Sheep? And plural sheep is sheep. It's like deer and deer. Okay. So there's this picture of Jesus holding one small sheep. And what's interesting to me is we always put the word lost on the sheep. We always say, Jesus is the good shepherd and the sheep were lost. I want to explore that for a little bit. I'm not arguing with it. I just want to explore that for a little bit. So close your eyes and picture, if you would, you're a sheep. And you're walking along the fence line, grazing as you go. And you're seeing the same vegetation that you have seen because you've grazed this fence before. Now, the vegetation is very edifying, tastes good, but you've grazed it before. And you come, and all of a sudden there's a void, there's a bit of a hole in the fence, and you don't know if it's been like that before and you didn't notice, or it's new, but you realize that there's a hole in your boundary, in your border. And you gaze out of that hole. And you see a plant just a couple steps away. And the plant looks very similar to what's on this side of the fence, what's on the safe side of the fence. But there's something different about the plant. It looks good. It looks like it would taste wonderful. And so you step through the void, and you just a couple steps away, you can still hear the shepherd singing. You can still hear the sound of the shepherd's voice. You see, Scripture teaches us that the sheep know the sound of the shepherd's voice. And we know the sound of our good shepherd because we hear him all the time. And so this sheep can still hear the shepherd. And so he's munching away. You're still the sheep here, and you're munching away on this new plant. And it tastes good. It tastes really good. And it's filling, but if you look just beyond it, just a little bit farther, there's this other plant. And this plant looks really, really good. Looks a little different. The coloration is a little different. You hadn't seen that before, but every part of you says, man, that looks good too. It's not that far away. So you walk down to that plant, and you give it a good sniff, and you're sniffing this plant, and you decide, man, this is going to taste really good. And so you start to chow in, eat on this plant, munch up the leaves. And what you notice is that you can still hear the sound of the shepherd, but he's a little farther away, little muted. And there's a new voice, and you can't really make out what the new voice is saying. It's almost as if you can sense that there's another voice, but you can't really tell. And one word becomes a little clearer in your mind, and you're not quite sure if you heard it or where it came from, but it just simply says, eat. And you thought, well, I definitely want to do that because this plant is good. And what you notice is if you're eating this plant, while it tastes good, it doesn't necessarily, you're not getting full. It's not filling as much as it just tastes good. And you look a little bit farther and you see a plant very similar to the one that you're eating, although the coloration is again, a little deeper in that odd color. And you think, well, if this one tastes good, that one's got to taste wonderful. And so you walk a little farther and you get to this next plant and you give it a sniff and you start to sample it and you're like, oh, this tastes really good. And you start to eat on this plant. And this new voice, you can hear this new voice and it's saying, eat, it's good. You're going to like it. Eat as much as you want. I have plenty. And the voice sounds very similar to the voice that you typically hear, your shepherd. But there's just something, the accent's different, something's a little different, you're not quite sure what, and you don't really spend a whole lot of time thinking about it because the plant is good. And so you're chewing away and you're chewing away. And then you look beyond and you see another plant and you think, wow, I wonder what that one tastes like. Now picture yourself as the shepherd. And you're looking over your flock and you realize that one is missing. And what you realize at that moment is that one of your family is lost. And if somebody's lost in your family, you got to go find them. And so you walk the perimeter and you're looking, where could this sheep be? And you find the void. And you look beyond the void. And you can't see the sheep anywhere. But what you see is wreckage. You see where plants have been destroyed by this sheep who is on a eating rampage, has an appetite that cannot be satiated. It's consuming and consuming and consuming and not becoming full. And so the shepherd steps over the fence. And he leaves the 99 in the field, surrounded by the fence, the boundaries, and the borders, the safe haven. And he walks off into the wilderness in search of one. He searches for that one sheep. because he knows that that sheep is lost. And the sheep doesn't know that it's lost. The sheep is just following a different voice. The shepherd recognizes the sheep doesn't understand what lost is. The shepherd understands lost. And the shepherd follows the wreckage till he finds his sheep. Now the sheep is looking the other way. And the sheep is into this plant. And this plant has a bitter aftertaste. And the sheep can't quite put a finger on why it has a bitter aftertaste. But it realizes that if it eats more and more and more, it's like the aftertaste goes away, but then it seems to come back again. So it's eating and it's eating and it's eating. And then it feels this overwhelming presence behind it. And he looks behind him and he's blinded by a brilliant white light. Then he feels the familiar hands of the good shepherd reach down and cradle him, pick him up, and put him around his shoulders of the shepherd. And the shepherd holds on to his feet. And it's at that moment that the sheep that was lost, that didn't know he was lost, becomes sick and realizes that what he was eating was poison. And he didn't know it. It tasted good. And he begins to get sick all over the shepherd, who's carrying him back to the boundaries and the borders and the safe haven. There's a certain amount of embarrassment that the sheep feels because he's being purged of evil, and the evil is landing all over the one who is saving him from death. The one who is able to save us from death receives the evil and says, you will not be judged by this. You will not be judged by your wandering, for you were lost and now you're found. And that's when the sheep learns what lost means. Lost means not listening to the voice of the shepherd. And so as we gather here this morning to worship his holy name, I pray that quietly you would listen. Listen to the voice of our shepherd.